Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. With this forum happening and all the technical discussions about the energy markets in Europe, what in your view is perhaps the biggest challenge in achieving the gas and electricity target models?
I think for member states the biggest challenge is that it's the first time that we've ever had to be responsible for agreeing binding regulations on such a complex technical subject area. And it's very daunting from people like myself who are policy specialists, and we don't get too involved in the detail. But because we're responsible for agreeing these codes, which will have a massive impact, we can't take our responsibilities lightly, and we have to understand what we're agreeing. And it's been a very steep learning curve. And I think we've actually risen to the challenge very well. We've had enormous help from the regulators and the stakeholders, system operators. In the UK, we've set up stakeholder meetings at regular intervals, and there we all discuss the issues arising from all the codes. And we, in government, have an opportunity to ask questions, idiot questions very often. But with the help of the experts, we have learnt what the codes are supposed to do and how they're going to work, what impact they're going to have. And I think by the time we come to the comitology committee and we actually have to vote and bind our country to a set of rules, we feel much more confident now that we know what the impact is going to be, and so we can recommend to our ministers that it's okay to sign them off.
Yeah, that's good.
And that's been quite a learning curve.
And not an easy task.
Not an easy task. It's been absolutely fascinating.
And the journey continues.
It does, yes.
And in terms of perhaps a challenge that you're still addressing with the models and with the technical aspects of them?
I think the biggest challenge that I've faced that I didn't expect was what happens after you agree the codes. Once you get your head around a code and you've signed it off, you think your job's over, but then you have to implement the code, not only nationally but across borders with your neighbours. And that has been far more complicated than I ever expected, because even though they're regulations that are directly applicable, you have to change the way you do things inevitably. And so we're not only looking at what changes the UK has to make, but also what changes are happening in Belgium, France, Ireland, where we interconnect across the border. And so the changes we make have to be compatible with the changes they're making. And that is proving extraordinarily complicated. But it's crucial that we put in place compatible arrangements, because otherwise we're erecting barriers, whereas in fact we should be pulling them down. And I think that member states, need to think a bit more about the implementation stage when they're actually negotiating, because you want to make sure that you're putting in place something that can be implemented, relatively easily and within the deadline, which is important.
Of course. Very good. Well, thank you very much. One last question, perhaps, and if it were up to you and you could decide any particular aspect towards delivering these targets, what do you think would be the one thing that you would like to see done?
I think the problem in the early days was that member states were sort of left out of the discussions, because obviously the regulators and the TSOs and the stakeholders, they know their business and it's very important to them. And so an awful lot of the discussions actually go on in those fora that member states just never see. And I think we felt a bit sort of bereft sometimes that things are going on that we have no idea of, and so we're feeling a bit left out. And I think it's inevitable, but I think more and more we are now being involved in sort of discussions earlier on. I think that's important for everybody, that we have to be brought along with the process, and that. Given sufficient explanation, we can actually get our head around some of these really complicated issues.
Indeed.
And it's important for us that we do know, because we have to sell it at home.
And deal with the consequences.
And deal with the consequences, yes.
Oh. Very good. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to discuss this with us, and look forward to the next steps.
Yes, me too.